emergency for the first time in about...
This is Jim, and
Receiving this message. We are Ken Jennings and John Roderick. We speak to you from our present, which we can only assume is your distant past, the turbulent time that was the early 21st century.
Fearing the great cataclysm that will surely befall our civilization, we began this monumental reference of strange and obscure human knowledge. These recordings represent our attempt to compile and preserve wonders and esoterica that would otherwise be lost.
So whether you're listening from an advanced civilization or have just reinvented the technology to decrypt our transmissions, this is our legacy to you.
This is our time capsule. This is the Omnibus. You have accessed entry 022.JB3132, certificate number 36809. An African in Greenland.
Hallo, effect?
Ayong ilang isim me.
I know. It's serious.
That doesn't even scan.
It's become like a tick for me to Morrissey everything.
I do that with anything that has the rhythm of Werewolves of London.
Oh.
Like if
you
there's,
go, oh.
Yeah, if there's a sign that says like veggie samosas, I'll be like, veggie samosas. And there's a few others, including some that are just so short that I don't even know why. Like, I think there's a 2-syllable one I do, and I don't even know what that would mean.
Yeah. It's a trigger. I don't have any of those with you, though.
What do you mean?
Well, I don't. When I think Ken Jennings, it doesn't.
Oh, with my name?
Yeah, it doesn't have a song that goes with it.
Ken Jennings. It's not really that rhythmic.
I do say it's America's Sweetheart Ken Jennings whenever you walk into a room.
I mean, it's a little bit Dr. Seussy, Ken Jennings.
Yeah. As Dr. Seuss famously said.
Yeah, his famous book. Have you heard of my Bubba? Do you? I know you're a world traveler. Do you ever read travel literature? Like
I think
travel writers.
I went through a phase, yeah, but I suffer from the green demoness of envy.
There's a green demoness.
A green demoness.
She comes to you by night.
I know.
like the ghost coming to Dan Aykroyd.
Yeah, she's the envy, the Greek goddess,
the famous green-eyed monster
who leans heavily on me whenever I read travelogues, because I feel like there was a future for me as a travel writer, and when I read people that have somehow made that their vocation, I always feel a little bit like, well,
I could have done that.
Yeah, like how hard is that?
They probably got free hotel and meals.
Yeah. And also, like, why am I reading about this? Why don't I just go do it?
That's the thing. I guess I saw you reading. Weren't you reading Patrick Lee Fermer not too long ago?
Well, so I read those books a long time ago, and I found them so, like, overwrought. And I found him, as a teenager at least, or a young man, insufferable.
They did not make you want to
go
to the Greek Isles or whatever?
They made me just rage. And then when I realized his later story, I mean, when I read them the first time, I had no idea of the arc of his life. And when I understood the arc of his life, I had a new interest in just knowing more about him. Like by the time he was in late middle age, he seems like maybe the most fascinating man in the world. And I wish I could have sat at his feet. But
you went from contempt to the green-eyed demoness, we call it, yeah. As we all say.
But partly it is that when I travel, it's always under a little bit of a kind of cloud of an expectation that if you're not struggling, then you're not having an actual authentic experience.
There's no narrative if you're just
traipsing.
I went to that restaurant that was supposed to be good and it was sheer good.
Yeah.
Then I went to the temple and it was really picturesque.
It was really nice. And so many travelogues seem to be this kind of like, it was amazing. Oh, I met these wonderful people and it was so great. And I just had this amazing, so they're recounting adventures, but there's no tension. There's no struggle.
You need to be more like Paul Theroux and take your kids to the coast of Nicaragua and then they all get eaten by pythons or whatever.
And Paul Theroux, I like those books, or I mean, I like the ones I read. I didn't read them all, but I always felt like, and that was my, in a different way, my kind of critique of Eat, Pray, Love was just that it all worked out. Like, I don't want it to all work out, right? You've got to come away with real scars somehow.
You think Eat, Pray, Love should end with a crocodile attack?
Yeah,
that would be the eating.
Eat, Pray, Love, Die. That's the book I wanted.
All books really do end with die. That is the end of all human adventure.
Yeah.
So do you think all books should change their titles to just have die at the end?
I feel
A Tale of Two Cities and then death.
The Old Man in the Sea, die.
Pride and Prejudice and death.
I do feel like maybe my works will only be published after I die. And so, die will be implied.
It'll be in the past tense.
Yeah. Dead.
And then I died.
Died.
John Roderick,
died.
Dead. In some kind of silo.
But I err on the wrong side of that, right? And when I travel and write, I like seek discomfort a lot of the time as a kind of, and I think when I was young, I imagined it was a shortcut to enlightenment or a shortcut to truth.
It's a shortcut to better books.
It's a shortcut to better books.
There's more conflict and a veneer of authenticity.
But you also often find yourself, or I found myself, like sleeping under a fountain next to a hotel where they had a big sign in the window that said "free rooms,
free beds for John Roderick,"
and I was like, I'm sleeping in the gutter, and it started to feel dumb after about age 24.
I don't read a lot of travel books. Because I guess I don't understand the
appeal.
I mean, really, it's just you're enjoying a memoir. I think like the travel books I've read that I liked are, you're getting to know the person. It's not really about what the Nicaraguan coast is like.
But we were talking about this earlier today. The fact that all writing is memoir,
it's true.
And that ergo all writing is boring.
I don't know if I believe that second part. It depends on the person. I mean, it really is like you're meeting a person. And maybe they're insufferable and therefore not boring. Or maybe they're delightful and therefore not boring. I guess sometimes they're just boring.
Well,
Eat, Pray, Love.
Yeah, no, I would never say that. She's a fascinating woman.
She's a great novelist.
Well, and she's a wonderful
which I did not expect.
A conversationalist. Like, she's a very, very...
Have you guys met?
Yeah, several times. And in fact,
did you eat and pray but not love?
No, one time I made the mistake of...
I thought you were going to say one time I made beautiful love.
One time we made beautiful love. No, one time I made the mistake of talking to her about my feelings about Eat, Pray, Love.
Wait, why would you do that? Hey, what's up? Don't like your book.
We're kind of casual friends, acquaintances at least. And I had a theory. I'd been working on a theory, right? So I had a theory. It wasn't just, I don't like your book. It was,
here's why.
I was putting her book in the context of a larger theory I had. And boy, she put me in my place. Really, really, really firmly in my place. And it was a joy to behold.
Well, authors have the mistaken idea that they're the authorities on what they've written. They're the last to know.
But she's very smart and also like very good with words and very confident. So I was like, here's my theory. And she was like, sit in your chair. And I went, yes, ma'am. I
only knew her from I guess I first became aware of her work through the movie adaptation of her kind of soppy memoir.
Was that a good movie?
I don't know. I didn't see it.
No, I didn't.
It's just how I became aware of it. So I was very surprised when she started writing these extremely well-researched historical literary novels.
Yeah.
Who knew?
Yeah. Well, she's like smart.
I assumed so,
yeah,
but
like super smart.
Despite whatever dumb thing she did in Bali.
It's just any book that has the word love in it, unless it's love in the time of cholera. Unless there's cholera in the book, don't talk to me about love.
Is there cholera in Eat, Pray, Love?
I don't think so.
Is this true of your relationships in real life? You don't actually want love unless there's also cholera?
Don't say that you love me unless you've given me cholera.
So you have to have cholera first.
Yes.
And then,
well, you can say you love me as you reveal to me the diagnosis of cholera. Why do I feel so bad?
So you're single because not enough people have given you... I mean, it really whittles down your dating pool.
Cholera is less common in the Pacific Northwest, and maybe
than it once was.
Maybe I should travel to more tropical climes.
Maybe you could switch to what's the Oregon Trail disease? Dysentery. Switch to dysentery.
Yeah.
Maybe if on the first day of Christmas, my true love gave to me
Dysentery.
dysentery. There's kind of this.
What are the most recent travel books you've read?
I don't know. I can't even think of.
Oh,
one.
it's not a thing that you do.
Not recently. What have I read that is like a travel book?
The Bible.
They're always walking around in the Bible. Lord of the Rings.
Oh, yeah, that's a great travel book.
There's kind of speaking of what's her name, Elizabeth Stroud. There's kind of an unquestioned thing about travel literature that I had never thought of until recently, which is that the travel is always either between the developed world, our modern West, the U.S. and Europe, and, other kinds of more exotic, off the beaten path locations. I got that wrong. It's not Elizabeth Stroud.
No, it's Elizabeth Gilbert.
Elizabeth Gilbert. There we go. So, in her case, leaving her wealthy middle class milieu, wherever she was, New England, who knows?
Mm-hmm.
And winding up in Italy, India, and Indonesia. The three eyes, we call them.
The three eyes, where the food is good and the men are dark and handsome.
The eaty eye, the prayy eye, and the lovey eye. You start off in India for pasta. Sorry,
Right.
and you start off in Italy for pasta. There we go.
It's famous Indian pasta.
Then you make it to India in time to pray before bed. And then you follow the sun. Oh, no, wait, the sun's going the other way.
Going the other way. You get away from the sun.
You head to Indonesia for the sunrise. And
that's where you find the love.
That's where you make love on the beach.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a great trip. Don't get me wrong. But, these things are all seen through the eyes of, comfortable, in her case, fairly wealthy people, I think, from our own culture.
As so many of the great travelogues are, right? I mean, the Grand Tour,
sure.
All the great European writers who went back to steal marbles from like Greek villages.
And occasionally we have the account of someone from one of these more off the beaten path locations coming to our world, and that's a different kind of memoir. I mean, usually it's Borat. Usually it's Crocodile Dundee or Borat. It's someone who doesn't know how to use an escalator.
But there are older versions of that, like
Pocahontas?
Yeah, Pocahontas. A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court.
Yeah.
No, right.
Pocahontas invented the genre. She didn't get to write about it because she died of cholera or whatever shortly thereafter.
Dysentery. But there were examples of people. I mean, we've talked about them on the show. The sort of Japanese shipwreck like survivors that ended up in the United Kingdom, and we like those for their novelty and sometimes the outsider perspective they provide us on our weird culture. Right.
Because they're seeing it through their fresh eyes. But one thing we rarely have is kind of the peer-to-peer travelogue of somebody from a place that's not us going to a different place that's not us. And that would be most travel, honestly.
And there's got to be hundreds and hundreds of millions of similar accounts.
Stories.
Anytime someone goes to the Hajj, coming from somewhere Western and going to somewhere non-Western.
Sure, the old NW to NW vacation.
But you and I typically wouldn't read a Sudanese account of their trip to Saudi Arabia because it didn't, make it into the syllabus of the literature courses at BYU.
If there are other books like this, I don't know if I can think of one, but An African in Greenland, the subject of today's story, is kind of the ne plus ultra.
Nice,
It's
well
the as far as you can go with this kind of idea. Someone from a new and strange part of the world to the reader goes to a new and strange part of the world to them and the reader.
Right.
And there's some interesting things that can be done with that because, they have the ability to compare two things that are unfamiliar to you, and that's not something you could have done if it's either to or from your own part of the world. You kind of get double the local color and exotic flavor in one of these hypothetical peer-to-peer memoirs.
How many books do you think are written from the perspective of a Chinese traveler in India or an Indian traveler in China?
I wonder if they exist, but they're just not translated into English.
I mean, they almost have to be, just like statistically, of all the writers in the world.
Of all the people in the world. And it's obviously skewed by the fact that we travel more than people from Togo or Greenland.
Right. Travel in that way, right? And the kind of like, I'm going to write a little memoir about this.
Right. That's kind of the post-colonial way we do.
But if you think about all the, for instance, like the Chinese railroad engineers, or not choo-choo engineers, but like railroad builders who are currently in Ethiopia and Sudan.
Mozambique, exactly.
And the culture clash that must be happening there, or not clash, but just like encounter, right? Because I think everybody in Africa is used to Europeans tromping around in jodhpurs, but now there's this very helpful group of Chinese helpers,
technocrats,
who are here with a lot of money and a lot of help, a lot of industrial help, asterisks, and that's got to be a phenomenal. One of them at least has written a book about it.
These stories maybe don't get told or don't get translated.
Don't get translated.
But in 1981, Tete Michel Pomasi, a Togolese man, published his story of his youthful adventures in the Arctic. His name has a silent K. It starts with a KP.
And you don't pronounce it. It's not Kamasi. Kamasi.
Like so many great Beetle Bailey comics, it begins with KP. But I don't think you say the K. I think it's just
Pomasi.
Tete Michel Pomasi. And it's the first time I've ever had my attention drawn to, a travel book of this kind, where both places are new and strange. And his story is fascinating because he has a perspective on, first of all, he's writing it later in life, so he has a perspective on his own West African childhood that he wouldn't have otherwise if he hadn't been to the Great White North.
Right.
And he definitely has an unusual take on Greenland. And those places are both so strange that anybody's take on Togo or Greenland would be worth a read. So it's the elevator pitch for this book is fantastic. I think you would say the elevator pitch for this book is An African in Greenland. It writes itself.
There it is. That's the title. I think we have a tendency in the United States, and maybe this is true a lot of places, to conflate Greenland and Iceland. And Iceland seems, at least from a European perspective, kind of knowable because it just seems like Denmark, if you took Denmark and isolated it from everybody
moved it
for 400 years. But Greenland is nothing like Iceland.
Iceland has a cultural footprint too. You might know about Bjork.
Yeah.
Or
that's it.
Pretty much Bjork.
Yeah. Bjork.
No, they've got a great history of poetry and culture.
Yeah, they have gnomes. They make sweaters.
Right. Greenland doesn't even have people for the most part.
For the most part, it is very sparsely populated, and it has a dominant Inupiat culture.
Yes, in his book he calls the natives of Greenland Eskimos, just because that was kind of the common ethnological word at the time. Yep. So don't be offended if I were to do that. But let's see, Greenland is bigger than Alaska. Mm-hmm. In fact, it's roughly the size of Alaska and Texas or California put together. It's covered under so much ice that we don't even know if it's an island or an archipelago. It's the world's largest island, asterisk.
Now, I should say that when I said Inupiat, the Inupiats are the Alaskan Inuits, and the people of Greenland are
they're other Inuits
in the family of Inuit, but I don't think they would call themselves Inupiat. That's on the Alaska side.
Yeah, I think the indigenous people of Greenland spread west from Alaska through Canada and there. So it is kind of all one culture, and many of the myths are similar. If you're talking to a native of Baffin Island versus Greenland versus somewhere in Alaska, yeah. But the culture has varied over the thousands of years they've been there. Pomasi is from Togo in West Africa, a small country on the whatever that is, the Bight of Benin,
The Bay of Biscay.
Bay of Biafra, the
Equatorial Guinean Sound. Sluice. What is it called?
the Gulf of Guinea.
There it is. I was close.
Togo's tiny. It's about the size of Vermont and New Hampshire put together.
Which you would never do in this country.
Oh, they're already together. I mean, the Connecticut River divides them. Is that what you mean? You would never get rid of the Connecticut River and let them intermingle?
No, I don't think they have anything in common. We always put them together. We assume that Vermonters and New Hampshireans,
New Hampshireites,
are like peas in a pod, but they're not.
They're not.
No.
New Hampshireites live free or die.
Right.
Vermonters agree.
Just die.
Vermonters disagree. Yeah. All state mottos and books should end with die. Pomasi grew up in Togo when it was still part of French Togoland. It didn't have its independence until I think around 1960. So when the book begins in the 50s, he's a young boy living in a family milieu that to us seems a little bit unusual. His dad has a series of subordinate wives, of which he is one of the children, and therefore pretty low on the totem pole, although on a real totem pole, of course, the most important image is lower. But in the hierarchy of that culture, the youngest kid, I mean, the kids get nothing, and the youngest kid gets
less than nothing.
Yeah, gets pissed on by the older kids.
Especially the youngest kid of a lesser wife.
Right.
And that should be the name of my autobiography, except I wouldn't slur my mother.
Younger kid of a lesser wife.
Yeah.
He is, his dad appears to be pretty well off. He has some kind of good job as a foreman for some electricians union outside of the capital of Lomé. But they seem to be on the outskirts of the city because the kids spend their days earning extra money by shimmying up a palm tree after making nice with the groundskeeper. And, they have to leave the fruit alone, but they can bring down branches and fibers and husks and whatnot that can then be woven into mats.
Whenever next my daughter complains about her chores,
exactly,
I'm going to say, you're lucky. You're lucky you're the main daughter of the main wife.
They're like the palm tree is smooth at the bottom, so you have to just clutch on for dear life like you're climbing a greased fire pole. And then when you get about halfway up, it gets rough, which is even worse because then you scrape up your front. You've probably taken off your loincloth because otherwise it would get caught on stuff. So you're just shimmying up a palm tree naked like young Michelle. And the book, there's just the little details he has about what it's like to be the youngest child in this culture is very funny. He really seems fixated on the fact that as the youngest child, his siblings treat him terribly. And hierarchy is so important there that even twins, we've talked about the twins of West Africa, where even twins in Togo have a pecking order. But interestingly, it's the youngest twin who is the senior one.
Oh, the last to arrive must be the best.
Well, that's not the general rule for kids. But in twins, it goes something like this. Clearly, that was the senior twin who went to the other twin and said, hey, you go out there first and see if it's safe. And I'll come along in a minute if it is.
Smart.
And so in the case of a stillborn twin, that's a case of, it wasn't safe out there. Whereas if both twins arrived safely, clearly the smart one said, you go first. So the younger twin is the older twin, unlike in our culture, where the younger twin is the younger twin. Just one of many fascinating differences between us and the Togolese, John.
It's so fascinating. And I'm really chewing on it and that's going to be something I think about a lot. Which twin, the first or the last to arrive, is really the senior one?
I love the idea that there's enough room in there for one twin to be like, after you. No, after you. No, after you.
It's more of a spy versus spy situation.
That's right. Yeah. One day, Michel and his brothers are climbing up palm trees, and he gets to the top of a particularly promising looking one, takes a break, opens up a coconut and drinks the milk. And then he looks down and finds that under some of the fronds of this coconut tree, which he was about to
there's a gnome
harvest, there's an enchanted Greenlandic gnome. No, although it is a fairy tale beginning, there is a great snake, a serpent over just a huge cluster of eggs, some of which have already hatched. And so there's now baby snakelets writhing around over this angry mama snake.
I don't know whether to be thrilled or horrified.
And he's at the top of like a 30-foot tree.
Yeah. What are you going to do?
What do you do? I think he's left his loincloth and stuff down below.
Right.
So he just freezes. He has not brought his machete, or no, I think even if he had his machete, they're told not to machete a snake because then you just get 2 flailing snake parts, one of which has teeth. Wow. So you do not want to machete a snake. Just a tip for the future.
Okay. All right. Writing that down.
So instead, he starts to shimmy down as fast as he can, but the snake protecting its nest comes after him. And so he gets about, 20 feet from the ground, thinks he can survive and just drops and,
learns to fly, learns he can fly. He could fly the whole time.
Knocks himself out, gets concussed.
Oh.
His family hears the yell. And by the time they get there, the snake has come down and is like on him. And, so he wakes up about a week later, very, weakened in his hut. And, the family is like, well, can't believe you survived. We can't find the bite marks. And he's like, oh, I don't think I was ever bit. They thought he had just passed out and therefore the venom had not spread throughout his body. It turns out he was never bit. Just this snake scared the hell out of him. But his, he's still kind of wavering between life and death. So his parents, to continue the fairy tale metaphor, his father carries him into the sacred forest.
The sacred forest.
A nearby, part of what was once a great rainforest covering this part of Togo,
right?
Which was then
slashed and burned
out of existence during the French colonial era. So, but for whatever reason, this little cluster of a forest is left, and as a result, it's full of exotic fauna, and it's super religiously important to the people.
Right.
And there, he's taken into, they're met by a witch.
By the Ents.
A witch.
Oh, a witch. Even better.
Who takes her into his hut and says she's going to do a healing. It's because he, she wants to know if he's ever insulted or injured any snake, and he has a pretty good snake record.
What's your record on that?
I don't think I've ever injured a snake.
Have you insulted one?
Like not within their hearing? I don't think.
Do you know how well a snake can hear?
They don't have ears. They can hear the vibrations of me being like, and they're like, he just said that I suck.
I put a rooster in a snake cage one time, and the rooster had gotten too big and the snake wouldn't eat it. And it was kind of an insult.
Were you trying to feed the snake?
It was one of these situations where a friend had a snake.
Is he some weird guy that goes to elementary schools with a snake around him?
He actually drove an El Camino. And we got a rooster to feed the snake, like a boy, like a young rooster.
A
young boy.
That's the technical term for a young rooster.
Young boy rooster.
Or boy.
And he had gotten too big, and the snake wouldn't eat him. And it was hilarious to see this giant snake and a pretty large rooster in a cage, kind of looking at each other, not sure what to do.
I feel like we're going to hear from our tender-hearted animal rights listeners who do not think this is hilarious. John.
Well, what ended up happening was we put the rooster in the back of the El Camino and we drove across town. And that was hilarious because there wasn't room for me in the cab of the El Camino. So it was just me and the rooster in the back, and the rooster wasn't in a cage. So in El Camino, you're just sliding around back there.
Were you hoping to trade it in for 2 smaller roosters?
Well, no, because we had the rooster. What do you do with it? I was going to take it home. So we took the rooster to where I was staying, but I didn't actually live there. I was just crashing on the couch. And the guy that owned the house was like, you can't bring that rooster in here.
I believe that was foreseeable.
And so I'm in the living room negotiating the fate of the rooster, who's out on the porch. And at that point in time, the rooster and I had developed a relationship. And I really felt like the rooster would wait. But when I came out of the house to explain to the rooster that we had been rejected and he and I were going to have to go on a grand adventure, the rooster was gone. And I searched the whole neighborhood. And at that point, the rooster was 2 feet tall or whatever. And I don't know what.
El Camino with the top down or something? Where did he, or you had let him loose in the yard?
Well, no, I brought the El Camino left. I brought the rooster onto the porch.
And he just wandered off.
And this was in Seattle's International District, or what we would call now, I think, Little Somalia. The neighborhood's changed quite a bit. And the rooster, and I believe firmly that the rooster went on to live a long life
You don't think it was eaten with injera that night?
just living. He's probably 4 feet tall now. And
Cock of the walk.
Yep. He's 25 years old. No, I think that someone came along and said, look at this. Because the rooster got out.
Hey, look, free rooster.
And the rooster was like wandering the streets with a little suitcase in one hand and its dreams of Hollywood in a hat box.
It's a rooster that sings like Frank Sinatra, like in some old Looney Tunes.
And somebody came along and said, you know what? You're too big for a snake to eat, but not too big for me. And that thus endeth the story.
It's a little Aesop's fable.
Yeah.
The snake, the rooster, and the
indie rocker.
hungry Asian man.
Oh, and that guy too.
Yeah, wait. Yeah. Unseen. I guess he's not seen in the story. I guess all my snake encounters I have a very visceral reaction to snakes, which is like, whoa, why is that there? I want to stand in a different place.
Oh, is that right? You don't like go embrace the snake.
I've had snakes like
embrace the snake
put on me by weird reptile dudes.
Right.
And if I'm braced for it, I'm like, yeah, I guess there's a snake on me briefly.
They're heavy.
And I'm told it's one of the good ones. I'm a little bit of a snake racist. I want to make sure it's like a, very articulate snake.
I've got a lot of snake friends. So anyway, the witch says, have you ever insulted a snake?
He's got a good snake record, so she's puzzled. She thinks there's something in his past that maybe could have pissed off the python god. And at that point, pythons just start pouring out of the walls.
What?
At no point in the story does he say he drinks some kind of funny tea or smokes a funny pipe. But at this part, pythons begin like swirling around the room.
This is his hut or hers?
This is her hut.
Her hut.
He's gone into the sacred forest.
And now pythons.
Yeah.
Coming out of every hole.
Which are the, pythons coming out of every hole. Like number 3. I love that video. But, and she says, oh, this is a very auspicious sign. Which
she's into it.
Which I would not say if pythons were coming out of every hole in my house.
Well, that's why you're not a witch.
There's so many differences between me and a West African witch, and that's just one of them. Mm-hmm. I'm picturing some kind of like, dazzling Eartha Kitt type diva in this hut.
I'm picturing you in your Greenwood home with snakes pouring out of the walls, and what you and Mindy and your lovely 2 kids. I think your son would be pretty into it.
I feel like if there was I feel like if there was one garter snake on the porch, like we would have to like list the house.
Right.
I do remember we were my dad rented a house when they were moving from Singapore back to the States. He rented a house in Utah for the summer. And I went over there one time, and it was, he would just have the basement of some nice old lady, nice old Utah grandma. And the hill sloped down through this dry grass kind of to a creek bed. Oh. And I remember just kind of wandering down there one day, and I decided to wander back another way. And everywhere I stepped in the grass, it moved. And
you walked into a snake.
It was just, it was the end of Raiders. It was 100%. There's more snakes than grass. And me and my friend were like, how are we going to get back up? Because literally everywhere we move, snakes scatter. And we were just like, well, I don't think there could be rattlesnakes in Utah. It's not like... Yeah.
Normally you'd climb a palm tree in this situation, but...
I didn't have my loincloth.
Yeah.
So we just ended up thinking, because we're dumb college students, let's just run as fast as we can through the...
Give the snakes no opportunity
ground. In hindsight, we should just have banged on something, and their sensitive tympanic membrane would have said... These guys are yo-yos. I'm out of here. But we just ran up the hill as fast as we can with like snakes moving from underfoot with every step. And it worked out. So clearly I'm protected by the python god as well, of Utah.
When you were growing up here in Washington State, did you not ever, because you used to see garter snakes here a lot, and I would go get garter snakes and bring them home. And one time, tragically, a garter snake got loose in our house. Oh. And my mom never found it.
Oh, and boy. Did she have some of the other wives try to look for it?
She still talks about it as when she lists my crimes.
It got out.
It takes a long time to list all my crimes, but the garter snake in the house was one of them. She's convinced it's still living in the walls of that house with the rooster, presumably.
I don't think either of them.
The garter snake and the rooster. Those are on either side of my coat of arms.
They're happily married. Yeah. Queer icons. The garter snake and the rooster.
But you never had garter snake times?
Yeah, in the yard, especially my grandparents' place in Oregon, you'd see they were a lot of them. They were just kind of little green ones that were didn't read as snakes to my early mammalian hindbrain.
I haven't seen one in years. I don't know what happened to them.
I don't even see slugs anymore.
Slugs are gone.
The mass extinction.
No, the slugs. You and my mom were talking about this not very long ago, weren't you?
Yeah, where'd the slugs go?
Where'd the slugs go? They were replaced by snails, and then where'd the snails go?
Maybe I salted all the slugs.
As part of your Salt the Earth campaign?
From when I was a kid. So the priestess is impressed by this reptilian outpouring and says, the snakes are pleased with you. You need to start training to be a Bokonon, a priest of the snakes. And young Michel thinks, the last thing I want is to become a priest of the snakes.
What, he's content being the youngest, the runt child of an unloved wife?
Well, he would already be the runt child, and now he's got to
be the priest of the snakes.
So you and I would love to be the priest of the snakes, but he just got almost killed by a snake. He's got some trauma to process. He doesn't say this, but it's kind of between the lines. He's like, now I'm in a family situation I don't like, and I'm getting pushed into a career I don't like. And that around that time, he wanders into one of the few bookshops in Lomé, Togo, run by some evangelical missionaries, and finds a book by one Robert Garant called "The Eskimos from Greenland to Alaska." At the time, you could say Eskimo, and it's full of kind of National Geographic style pictures. Like, I don't mean naked people. He already has that. For him, National Geographic pictures are fur anoraks.
Yeah, you would not survive long in the Inuit culture if you were naked.
That is correct. And so he's fascinated by that, by the descriptions of cold. Like, he reads like low numbers, and it's like a kid reading the Guinness Book of World Records. He's like, what? Like, it's below 30 centigrade there? Like, he can't get his mind around it. There are not only the people all seem very friendly. There's lots of pictures of kind of smiling, chubby native people going about their seal hunting and fishing business.
Right.
And he loves that. The snow, of course, seems very new and strange to him. There are no snakes and not even trees.
Right.
So the two things that have led to his downfall, having to climb up palm trees and then getting attacked by snakes, he would be clear.
Right.
In Greenland, this treeless wonderland. And anthropologically, he reads that the culture up there, what the book calls Eskimo culture, really values children. Like, the child is the boss of the family, and the younger, the better.
Huh.
And so to Young, you can see how to Michel, this seems like it's the answer to all his problems.
Yeah, right.
My problem is that I'm an African. I need to be an African in Greenland.
Yes.
He says to himself.
While still a boy. He's how old at this point?
He's a teen.
Yeah.
This is now like 1958, I think.
Wow. Little did the residents of Greenland know what was about to transpire.
So he tries to figure out, how do I run away to Greenland? It's daunting. I mean, it would be daunting for you and I to run away to Greenland. He's living in...
I could buy a ticket to Greenland.
He's living in West Africa.
Yeah, that would be harder. In 1958.
Yes, as a teen. As a teen, your options to get to Greenland... How do you get from Teenland to Greenland? It's tricky.
Mm-hmm. And presumably,
maybe this book should be called From Teenland to Greenland.
If only weeks before he had little enough money that he valued dead palm fronds,
coconut husks. Yeah.
It would be tough to scrape together the resources to get on a tramp steamer. And which tramp steamers are going from Togo to Greenland?
There are no direct flights or cruises.
Right.
It turns out. And really, he has no options. He realizes that he has an aunt who has married a Ghanaian. Ghanaian, is that the right adjective?
Ghanaian. Ghanaian.
Somebody will tell us how to say this demonym.
Sure
They're already emailing us right now. Like, before I finish this sentence, send.
Ghanaian.
His aunt has married a Ghanaian fisherman, and aunts in this culture, unlike children, are prized. They are the
aunties.
Yeah, the aunties are kind of the spiritual lifeblood of the family. Even a father will defer to what the aunt says.
My sister certainly wishes that were true here.
Yeah, we have a very aunt disregarding culture.
Increasingly not in this home. My sister
she calls the shots.
Well, she's sort of arrived here and set up camp, and now she's up there right now telling us what we're going to eat and drink.
What's she doing?
Well, I have no idea. We're down here in the bunker.
We're safe.
Thank goodness.
We're safe from all her schemes and yoga classes.
One of the reasons I built this bunker.
So this aunt is now living in Cote d'Ivoire, and so he can, if he says, "Hey, I'm going to go stay with Auntie," there's little his dad or the 8 wives can say about this.
Right. Well, and they're probably like, good riddance, Snake King.
They probably want him to be a snake priest. That would probably be a lot of prestige.
Sure, of course.
I bet if one of my kids told me they wanted to be a snake priest,
Yeah, think about it.
I would be telling the
You'd
neighbors
be like,
immediately.
this is so much better than being a Uber driver.
So he winds up in Cote d'Ivoire. This whole part of the book takes him 6 years to get out of West Africa.
Okay.
Much less to Greenland's icy shores.
Right. He's using up his teen years.
He heads to Cote d'Ivoire, gets a job, and then he finds his aunt is trying to marry him off because that's what the aunties are for. And he's like, oh, I got to get out of here before she finds me a bride. Unfortunately, Cote d'Ivoire decides it's going to repatriate all its migrant workers, and so he's put on a DC-10 back to Togo and has to start over. This time he goes to Senegal and gets a good job typing in the embassy. He appears to have a gift for languages in this whole book.
Yeah, he learned to read and write, which is kind of impressive given his station.
I assume his middle class, his family is what passes for, if his dad has 8
sure,
wives and wife equivalents, they must be doing pretty well.
Yeah, you're right.
So
wife equivalents.
Well, I don't. What's the right word? They're not concubines.
Other wife.
But they're like wife asterisks. There's a difference. There's there's 2 stages of wifeness there.
It's like a chrysalis.
Yeah, exactly. It's a pupa wife. No, there's
you can the different 2 different statuses of wife.
Different privileges.
It's on your license plate. Yeah.
But I think maybe just his native language is Mina, which is only spoken by it's one of the 40 or whatever languages spoken in this tiny sliver of Togo.
We talked about that in the Twins of West Africa.
And I think do you think it lends people a linguistic, a good ear or a good ability with languages if from a very young age you're having to assimilate just multiple languages from French to a bunch of indigenous languages? I
mean, they do talk about people who come from tonal language cultures having
his is tonal,
having more incidences of perfect pitch. So growing up with a language that has pitch as an element of communication, you're more quickly able to attain perfect pitch. So I imagine that's probably true.
Through the whole book, he appears to have just an almost superhuman facility with language. He shows up in Germany at one point, and suddenly he's just speaking German on the train, and they're like, how do you know German? He's like, well, I don't, but it was, Togo used to be a German colony. So, and by the next page, he's just, Germans are taking him home. He appears to just be able to pick up any language.
God, wouldn't that be an incredible skill?
It really
One
would.
of the great gifts.
And he presents himself in the book. The writing is very fluid and easy to read. And he presents himself as just kind of a wonderstruck everyman.
Yeah.
But it's clear that he has just from the way people treat him, it's clear that he has a great deal of personal charm and charisma and ability. So in Senegal, within a week, he's a bilingual typist at the Ghanaian embassy because he speaks French and English and I guess a bunch of other languages. And suddenly he's super comfortable. They're like, oh, and one of our diplomats now has an extra apartment so you can stay there. Suddenly he has this dream set up in Dakar, Senegal. And he thinks, you know what? If I stayed here for a couple of years, I'd have enough money to see Greenland in style.
Wow.
But he thinks, like you, that would not be authentic. I would get too comfortable.
You don't want to see it in style.
I want to sleep under a fountain.
I mean, for me, sitting here, living in Dakar in an embassy apartment sounds like the awesomest. What am I doing now? When my daughter, the day she graduates from high school, I'm moving to Dakar.
To become an embassy clerk?
Yeah, that just sounds so awesome.
Start studying up for the Foreign Service exam now.
I wish I were a 22-year-old embassy clerk in Dakar instead of a decrepit,
an old broken Graham Greene character.
Yeah, exactly.
So he decides I got to leave now before I get too cozy.
Yeah.
So he just heads. He knows Greenland is north, so he just heads into the Sahara.
I love this guy.
He just this is not too different from some of your adventures. He winds up in Mauritania.
Yes.
Trying to go to the furthest outpost he can get, and when he gets there to port whatever, he finds that trucks don't go that way anymore.
Oh wow, we've had the same. We've had the
he went the opposite direction.
Same experience, except on the other side of the desert.
He's on the southern edge, and so at that point, he kind of has to go back to Senegal and start saving money again.
Oh, that was just like me and Marrakesh.
And it is not until 1963, fully 6 years later, that he winds up in what his family would have called Yovo-de, France, land of the white people.
How did he get there?
Yeah.
Just saved his pennies.
Yeah, saved up and hopped on a boat to France. And at that point, there's a couple more years in the book of him hopscotching across Europe. He, everywhere he goes, he immediately has some clerical job or just washing dishes at a hotel and getting all his meals for free. And also, as part of his, I don't think in Europe this would have been the novelty of meeting a black African man in 1960, but because there would have been a
whole influx.
He mentions there was an influx from
post-colonial.
That's what you get when you say you own Africa. They come and visit, and you can't. Your fascists complain, but what are they going to say? So he is. He doesn't seem like he would be much of a novelty in these large European cities where he winds up. He's in Marseille, and then he's in Paris. Then
he's not in Marseille.
He's in Then he's in Germany. Then he makes it up to Copenhagen, and in all these places, he immediately, like on the train, finds some nice old man who wants him to stay.
He has the gift of charisma.
A widow with, he tells a widow with 2 daughters on the train that he's headed for Greenland. This is when he's learning to speak German. And they're like, Greenland, my young friend, you'll be so cold,
Yeah.
You must come stay with us. And so immediately he gets off the train in Dusseldorf or whatever and has an apartment.
And she's knitting him sweaters and...
Right. Yeah. And worrying about him. The older Frenchman he ends up staying up with he starts calling him Papa, and they develop a familiar relationship, and this guy ends up sending him a monthly check throughout the rest of the book. And at no point does he think there's anything untoward about this old guy that would love to have a
surrogate son.
Or
what are you suggesting?
Well, I mean,
you seem like you're implying something.
It seems like if you're in a French train station and an old French man approaches you, a young, tall black man, and says, I would like you to come stay with me.
This has all happened to me except for the being black part. And the check I get from him it's just a pittance.
It doesn't even...
No.
Has he kept it up over the years, though?
Oh, wait, I saw.
There's never any hint that anything odd is happening. He just seems to be a magnet for like interested people who, when he explains his quest, they want to sponsor it. And I guess I can see that.
This is the wonderful thing about a quest. The defining quality that a quest gives all travel, because there are so many people that are just traveling for the sake of traveling. And you're wandering around, and so,
I'm going to see these 3 places and then go home.
Yeah, or like, I don't know where I'm going to go, and somebody takes you home, but there's no focus, and there is an element of kind of you can feel like a scam or a scammer over time, because it's like, why am I here? I'm just here. And when do I leave? I don't know.
He didn't say he was Sidney Poitier's son or anything to this guy.
but the wonderful thing about, and this was true, it's been a while since I mentioned my walk across Europe, but
wait, did you walk across Europe?
Yeah, funny you should mention it. But people assumed that I was on a religious pilgrimage. And when they thought I was headed to Jerusalem, which was the way they tried to contextualize, I was coming from the north and headed to the south. Where could I be going but Jerusalem? And when they thought that, I got a completely different reception. And then I would always take pains to say, I'm not really going to Jerusalem. And then you could see that, they would have to reevaluate how much soup they actually wanted to provide.
But if you had a similar story, if you were like, I'm going to Istanbul because when I was young, I heard a tale of the Blue Mosque, or I always wanted to see the Bosporus ever since I first read Homer, or
Yeah, people would totally buy into that. And the problem was, my story was, my indie rock band broke up, and I didn't really know
at this point invent a story.
What to do next.
Were you never tempted to invent like Elizabeth Gilbert?
Well, no.
She wants to eat.
This was
then
my
she wants
problem.
to pray. Then she is prepared for love.
I definitely needed to eat. I tried to pray, completely ill-equipped to love. No, part of the problem of having an authentic experience is that you can't couch it in a lie, or even, if you're even like a myth. I had to confess to every person.
Oh, you could have
my faithlessness.
You could have invented a myth, and it would have grown into the truth.
I know, that's what I should have done. I'm trying to do that now, Ken. I'm trying to have the myth grow into the truth,
but without travel. What's your COVID era myth?
I'm traveling in my Imaginarium.
Nice. In your VR headset.
So he's thriving in Europe.
He winds up in Copenhagen and actually begins to take more serious anthropological interest in his quest. He spends a lot of, all his free time from washing dishes at the hotel. He's at the National Library or the National Museum, looking at, studying the indigenous cultures, looking at Eskimo art.
And he's got to be an incredibly well-educated person by this point in time.
Yeah.
Like self-educated.
Autodidact, but like he is. I mean, think how much you would learn about yourself spending 6 years working in the embassies of West Africa and then 3 years taking trains across Europe.
I can imagine.
He might be one of the best traveled Togolese in the world at this time.
It's incredible, right?
By the time he takes his 8-day voyage across whatever strait it is from Denmark to Greenland, it turns out even though he's in Denmark and Greenland's part of Denmark, he needs a special, visa or certificate or whatever. And they're very reluctant to give it, like basically on the basis of, young man, you'll be quite cold. And so he has to pull some strings.
I feel like there have been so many people over the centuries who have thought Greenland, like that's the future. Like Greenland, first of all, it's got green in the name, so it's got to be lovely. It's huge, and it seems like a world of untapped resources.
Do you remember? Wasn't President Trump trying to trade for it?
Oh yeah, right. He wanted to trade Canada for it, but then he realized that we didn't
have Canada. Yeah. So it's a huge stumbling block to his plan.
I think most people don't realize that most of Greenland is under a glacier, right?
He arrives at his journey is all along the coast, which is the only inhabited part of it. It's got a series of deep and picturesque fjords like Norway running up and down both coasts, although most of his journeys are along the west coast of Greenland. And it's just dotted with little fishing towns because, everything else is just impenetrable, trackless ice waste all year.
You're an impenetrable, trackless ice waste.
Yeah, I really am. But when he arrives at one of these coastal towns, it's quite green with lichen. He, he's heard the story of Eric the Red naming it Greenland to try to, as kind of a real estate scam.
Yeah.
Goes back to 13th century sagas. So there may be something to it.
That's actually true. We named it Iceland to keep people away and named it Greenland to sucker people in.
The Greenland part of it does actually date back to not too long after Eric's lifetime. So, it was something that was said about his myth, prior to modernity.
Huh.
But when he gets there, it is quite green. It's green with lichen. He arrives at the town of Kakortok, which is Julianahab.
In its Danish.
In its Danish name. All these places have an Eskimo name and a Danish name. And as you will imagine, as he gets off the boat, it is the biggest thing that's ever happened in Greenland.
Right. They're like, who is this guy?
He is 6 foot tall, which, he's not like some 7-foot Dinka tribesman, but the average height in Greenland, apparently, the indigenous people are, hover around 5'3".
Right.
So he is a giant, and they call him, he spends the book being called Mikalika the Giant, basically. So all eyes are on him as he walks down the gangplank. A group of children follow him around like the Pied Piper. Everywhere he goes, word has already reached there. He'll show up at a different town, and it'll be like, oh yeah, my niece's friend saw you 2 months ago and said you might be coming. He's an authentic celebrity. Over the radio, within a few days, the radio in the capital Nuuk or Gotthab is announcing that Greenland's first black visitor has arrived.
And does he speak Danish at this point?
From his year in Copenhagen, he's got pretty good Danish.
And do they speak Danish in Greenland?
So the story of Greenland is not unlike Togo, and this is not really foregrounded in the book, but it surfaces a bit. It's an indigenous people who have been settled by a European power, not always with the fantastic results you'd expect.
Right. The grace that Europeans have shown
famously
globally.
all over the world.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of these towns are not doing well.
It's a resource extraction economy.
It's a hunting culture where the hunting is no longer going great. So the future is shrimp and cod fishing, but the people don't love it. They don't culturally. They don't like the switchover. They don't like the fish. He's enjoying all the mackerel while they're eating boiled reindeer meat because, in their culture, the boiled reindeer is prestigious and, provides the needed fat calories to get through the winter. He's enjoying this sushi grade mackerel and they're just like rolling their eyes at this weirdo eating bait. Right. So there's some prestige to meat that fish doesn't have. There's a lot of drinking. A fair amount of the people he meet, don't appear to do much, and they say they're seal hunters, but they go out once a month, and really, luckily, there's a Danish government allowance that keeps them going. So yeah, it's a culture that's not in great shape, and probably reminds him a lot of what France did to Togo back home.
Right.
But why was I saying this? What was your question?
Do they speak Danish?
So yes. So there's a mix of. There's, mostly he stays with indigenous people because he enjoys the smaller villages that are off the beaten path. I think he never actually winds up in the capital. Some of them have been westernized, Danishized to some extent. And really the only time in the book, a town refuses to let him in, it's because, the influential first citizen, is a kind of Danishized Inuit man who says no, because his would have been a hospitality culture. Everywhere he goes, people are fighting to let him stay, whether they have a bed or not, whether they have extra seal blubber or not. But in this one village, people won't say, and it's because the guy has been Europeanized and is like, no, that's not what we do.
Oh, interesting.
And once he says no, all the locals have to say no, from Canute, the actual Danish school teacher, all the way down to he ends up staying in a kind of a poor alcoholic shanty on the outskirts of town because that's the only guy who is low status enough to buck the de facto mayor.
Right. Yeah. So, this was an era when, the most of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century, the European mentality about Inuit culture was let's eradicate it.
Right.
And put everybody in Western schools and,
that's the one place he mentions because it reminds him of Togo. He says, I got to say, they're not teaching the indigenous languages in the schools, which I think is crazy.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the one time that shows through that it reminds him of maybe what the French have done to his part of the world. But I should say that when the radio announces that Greenland has its first black visitor ever, that appears to not be true. If nothing else, one of the most famous African-American men of his time went to Greenland.
Go on.
I'm speaking, of course, of Satchmo himself, Louis Armstrong. No, Matthew Henson, who was with the Robert Peary expedition. Is that right? Claimed to have been the first to visit the North Pole, although today, it's Robert Peary's expedition. One of his men was Matthew Henson, a Maryland-born black man, born to post-Civil War sharecroppers in 1866. And in many accounts, he's the one who first sets foot on what the expedition decides is the North Pole. And many of those expeditions were to Greenland or left from Greenland.
Right.
But that was, that would have been decades
years
before.
Prior. Decades.
50 years. Yeah, about 50 years prior. And so there doesn't appear to be any memory of a black person there. So it has all the.
And he was on the boat. He was on Greenland, but he didn't do a grand tour.
I think there was some exploration, some dog sled exploration of northern Greenland on some of Peary's Arctic trips, which Henson would have been along for the ride on. But 50 years later, this is a huch novelty. The people call him Kash Luna, which if you look it up, he's confused because if you look at him in a dictionary, that's the Eskimo word for white man. But it turns out they don't see color. To them, there's just, are you Inuit or are you Inuit or are you out of it, basically.
Right.
And that's a pun.
That's good.
And
not good, but yes.
And so they call him Kash Luna, their word for white guy, which he doesn't mind. It now means foreigner. And in fact, one person says, "Oh, hey, I saw your countryman on the news. You're going to be interested in this." And he's like, "What black guy have they seen?" And the guy rummages through some papers and brings out a picture of
Elizabeth Taylor,
General de Gaulle. Here it is, your cousin Charles de Gaulle. And I think there's only at one point in the book where some drunk some angry drunk calls him the N-word, like you low down so-and-so.
Right.
And he's very philosophical in kind of the mold of your dignified 50s black gentleman who is kind of forced by society into being a good representative of his people.
Sure, an emissary.
Yeah. Honestly, a phenomenon which affected Barack Obama as recently as 2009 to 2016, like dial it down and make sure you're not too. And so in the book, he's very philosophical. Clearly, in my experience, every time I've had a slur like that, it was just somebody dealing with their own inner problems and demons and had nothing to do with me,
Right.
So he's
not wrong. And he's
exactly right.
living in a pretty good state of the mind.
I'm sure in the moment, it is not as easy to shrug off as perhaps you have to make it seem in these accounts for a wide audience.
When a drunk person is screaming something at you, you can always take it with a grain of salt.
So he winds up staying in a series of houses with all the locals who are fighting over him, and they offer him all their delicacies, whale skin and seal blubber. A lot of the book is about food.
Yeah.
He hates it all at first. By the end of the book, he's like, he hates when the reindeer is boiled, when it's a caribou steak, when it's grilled, he's like, delicious.
Boiled reindeer is not delicious.
I've had reindeer once in grilled form, and it was pretty good. But
Yeah.
I can't imagine any meat benefits by boiling it, especially game.
My mom was just talking about the fact that her mother's family preferred their meat boiled. And she would go visit them. Her mother died at a young age, or, right after my mom was born. And she would go visit her mother's family, and they were like, oh, boiled. Tonight we have boiled chicken and boiled beef, every kind of meat you could possibly want, all boiled with the yellowy, and she still cannot eat boiled meat to this day. And I don't like it. I'm assuming you don't like it.
I don't know what.
Why would you? If you could cook it any other way.
I guess corned beef is boiled. Is that true? Does that count?
Oh, yeah. I do like corned beef.
It's already been marinated for your pleasure.
But when you're at Katz's Deli and they pull that big slab of corned beef off and they chop off that like super gross yellow layer of fat.
That's what everything else is.
You're like, oh, thank God you're throwing that in the garbage.
There's so much fat eating in this book because
that's what you
it's
do
a
up
long,
there.
cold winter. And the stuff about, there's lots of little colorful details about what it's like in these Greenlandic seaside villages. All the day drinking that goes on, but also, people sharing local delicacies. Like even when they have a cup of coffee, they'll often put in, the local way to serve it is with aquavit and some kind of seal fat.
Yeah. Liquor and fat.
Stir it up.
Your coffee like that.
That's what they say. And so by the time you get to the bottom, it's like kind of a fatty sludge, which everyone finishes off with this. He'll eat some porpoise, and then the kids will be, fighting over the, which porpoise bones they can turn into a kind of toy. He goes to he's shocked at how, even though sure enough, the very first place he stays, a kid in the morning, he wakes up on the couch and a kid is fussing because they only have coffee and not tea. And the mom is like, okay. And he's like, oh, this kid's going to get it. And the mom's like, okay, I'll go down to the store and get some tea. So he really sees that the
kids run the show.
Yeah. The baby first culture is what he wanted. But there's a trade-off. He goes to an old folks home and he finds that nobody's family visits them and they're fairly neglected. It's not quite let them wander out on the ice, but these are cultures where there is some, there's actually some honor and theological purpose in suicide. It's, suicides go to heaven in a lot of Inuit cultures.
Oh, interesting.
So, there really is a culture of, I'll be fine. I don't want to be a burden on you anymore.
Well, yeah, subsistence, like true subsistence culture at the point at which you're not bringing in the bacon.
And he comes from a
ancestor,
an elderly and ancestor venerating culture,
right.
Exactly, where the elders are super important. So there's cases like that where the tension between West Africa and Greenland without a moderating, American or Western European reader is very interesting.
Well, that's the problem. He took so long to get to Greenland that he's now on the other side.
He's assimilated.
And he's like, wait a minute. No. It's the old people that you should treasure.
It just means he can speak to a lot of it. There's funny details like he goes to a movie and the movie's been subtitled in Danish. They don't dub there because in Scandinavia, and I think this is true to this day, the audience would find it funny, the idea that that Tom Cruise is speaking Danish.
Oh, sure.
You
Right.
know, like this is comical. Clearly,
Yeah, it's
these
ridiculous.
these actors don't speak Danish. This is taking place in South America. So they dub all their movies, but the problem is there's a big chunk
They
of the
don't
audience.
dub all their movies. They subtitle them.
Exactly. They subtitle all their movies. They don't dub a thing. And the problem is there's a big chunk of the audience in Greenland that doesn't speak Danish. So what they do is they'll run 10 minutes of the movie and then the projector will stop. And a guy will come up and explain what's been going on in the Danish subtitles in the local Inuit language. And then they'll run another 10 minutes of the movie. And then he'll come back up and fill everybody in.
Wow.
So it sounds like a terrible way to watch a movie.
Although, if that were how we watched movies here, I would love to have that job.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody. All right.
Here's
Let me-
what happened.
Let me explain. Okay, you know the blonde lady.
I like how you assume you'd be really good at this.
I think I would.
You
I think I'd be
probably
great
would.
at it. Let me just walk you through the movie.
Even though everything, you know, he sees a lot of the trappings of the books that he loved as a kid and the weird customs, he finds that they will smoke cigars they'll conserve a cigar by taking a long puff, then turning it around and putting the lit end in their mouth and putting it out in their mouth, and then kind of chewing on the ash and some of the unburned tobacco.
Well,
And so-
that'll preserve a cigar.
Then they enjoy the ash, and then they turn it around and relight it and take another puff, or put it away for another day.
Yeah.
You use every part of the cigar,
Yeah.
including the ash. He's a little disillusioned by it's kind of funny. There appears to be very free attitude toward sexuality in Greenland of the early 60s, and he's a little bit coy about it. You know, soon these girls were visiting my room too, and they were saying, "Where's the black one? Where's the black one?" You know, he's a real object for sexual curiosity, as you might imagine. But often he'll find that he thinks he's made he kind of falls for some local girl at a local dance, only to find that she's actually been dating Carl for a year, and Carl kind of pats seductively on the bed next to them. Come on, Michelle, and
It's much more complicated than he thought.
yeah, and he kind of sulks back to his room,
Not quite ready to go that far.
not ready for his first Greenlandic threesome. So there are some kind of funny. At one point he is treated for VD in a clinic. He kind of mentions offhand that he thinks it's a VD eruption. So he's a very popular guy. But there are many places where of course everyone's curious about Africa as well. He has to explain his own story, which includes explaining what a tree is to people who have never seen a tree. So he really kind of learns how baseline the cultural differences and assumptions are.
And really cool that his experience as an African, he ends up explaining the larger world in the way that your typical European explorer would recount. Like,
I'm a representative of the world to you benighted people.
Yeah, and in this case, he's
a Kosh Luna. He just happens to be one from Africa.
That's wonderful.
And there are places in the book where he's able to see some local customs and compare them to West African customs in a way that a British or American anthropologist would never be able to. This part of the animal is taboo, just like this part of the leopard, for example. Or at one point, a young boy catches his first seal, and the house, as is the local tradition, throws a huge party for the whole neighborhood. Everybody comes. Everybody compliments the boy about how delicious the seal is, but he's not allowed to eat any. He has to sadly sit and watch everyone eat the food he brought home.
Why?
I think it's just symbolizes, that he's helping to support the village now, and it's all about that, and not about, he doesn't do it for the catch. And that reminds him of a similar custom back home in Togo, whereby when a boy earns his first franc at whatever his odd job is, he has to bring it to his father. He can't spend it. His father has to, prize the first franc. Kind of an equivalent tradition. There's another one where, he goes out on the ocean and fishing he goes on a seal hunt and on a fishing boat where they're catching a kind of angry carnivorous fish he calls the sea wolf. And the book is
Was
full
it a
of
U-boat?
Yes. He's catching Nazis. The book is full of these long anthropological descriptions of how you butcher a seal, or how you put a yellow balloon on the fishing line so that you can go back to your net later, or, all these kind of interesting procedural things. And in this case, he compares the practice of a seal hunt to the lion hunts back home. It's really good anthropology. It seems like he'll often go running for a tape recorder or a camera, if somebody's singing a folk song, or to write down a local legend. He's a little disappointed by how most of the folk songs appear to be like 20th, like all the dances he sees are just kind of 20th century leftovers from early Danish era. Right. He clearly wants to delve into the ancestral past, and the
attempts to eradicate the Inuit culture
have been successful. Yeah. He ends up heading north because he wants weirder and weirder stuff. He wants the real seal hunters and dog sleds he read about, and not these kind of cushy coastal villages. And he arrives in the north just in time for polar autumn, which apparently is the weirdest time. It's not that everything's dark, it's that the specter of darkness is coming, so everyone kind of has the dread of the 6-month night. The days are crazy up there. Like at one point, I think the sun rises for the first time on March 17th. There's a little glimmer. Everybody goes up on the cliff by the village to watch the sky kind of turn slightly green, and they're like, yay, Mr. Sun is back. And 2 months later, by May 17th, it is day all the time.
Yeah.
Like there is just spring is like an hour, basically.
That's phenomenal.
There's dark all the time and light all the time, and that's all you get. But in the polar autumn, everybody's been up all summer because there's not really blackout curtains. So everybody just kind of has 3 months of insomnia or whatever, 6 months of insomnia.
Yes.
And
super insane, I might add.
You probably remember this from Alaska.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't have 24 hours of daylight, but you definitely...
It's energizing.
So much daylight, and you thrive, but it's a bipolar existence.
So people literally. Well, it's unipolar, but for the people, it's bipolar.
Yeah.
So the people are living. Their bodies have been put to the test by this manic summer. They see nighttime looming. The ice is now too thick to go do any of their outside stuff, but it's not thick enough to actually walk or hunt or sled on. So everybody's kind of cooped up at home. So I guess autumn is the kind of the craziest time. Spring, by the way, stinks because everything thaws because everybody was just dumping everything in the snow,
right? Which
worked until it all starts to melt.
Hot again.
Yeah, exactly. He finds the farther north he goes, there's a lot of life's really, really tough up there. People are routinely eating their sled dogs when they're forced into it. There's a very lengthy description of how sled dogs have to poop en route because you don't stop as soon as one dog, if one dog wants to poop, the rest of the team keeps going. So he'll try to squat and just keep getting dragged along. And finally he'll just his hindquarters will get so uncomfortable, he's just let it go in the air, right. And the person,
right into the face of the dog.
Him. Exactly. And the people in the sled have to know to duck because it might just be going everywhere.
Ouch.
The return of the winter means, there's all these rules for he's really not ready for the cold. All the stuff people told him was correct. And it's really like you and I would not be, maybe you would be, but I would not be ready for that kind of cold either. Cause you literally have to remind yourself there's certain things you cannot touch, like even just touching this object, you'll lose so much body temperature out of your hand that it's uncomfortable.
Yeah. I don't think you can be ready for it. I don't even think if you live there all the time, you're ready for it. It's just so
awful.
The cold is just so cold.
The static electricity is a problem. Like you can't, even on your dog sled ride, you would freeze to death on they end up running about a quarter of the time they're going anywhere on a sleigh because that's the only way to keep warm and therefore alive. If you stayed in the sled, you would die. You take a pen out of your pocket and the ink's frozen. You take a hanky out of your pocket and it's just like a sheet of crumpled metal.
So many stories about this. You spit in the air and it freezes before it hits the ground.
Yikes.
Cold.
But the winter is less crazy than the autumn. And the other thing about the return of the sun, he finds, the tradition he runs into, in addition to going up on the hill to see the glimmer of light, is it turns out it's a big wife swapping party.
Sure. The sexy times begin.
You're saying sure, like Alaska does this too.
Well,
is there a big key party every?
The thing about the key party in Alaska is it's on a rotating schedule. It's kind of like Ramadan.
They're really, he winds up at some party not knowing what's going on, and he kind of sees, a third partner wander up to a couple and start chatting, and then soon the husband will leave, leaving those two alone. And he observes that he's a little bit, at this point, he's kind of, he doesn't love the free love of Greenland. At this point,
a little too free.
Yeah, he notices for one thing, he notices that the wives are less into it than the husbands are.
Oh.
Like it may not be, everybody may not be enjoying partner swapping day equally. But he spends a full winter up there. And at the beginning of his second year, he feels like a Greenlander.
He really stuck it out.
He loves it. Even the stuff at first that was hard, like eating seal blubber or smoking the lit end of a cigar. He can do it all. And he feels very much at home, like this maybe was his native soil somehow. When he's talking about this in Europe, when he's talking about his great quest, people will tell him, well, your ancestors were nomadic and you have the urge to wander. And other people, that's what Europeans will say. Africans will say, you must be a reincarnated spirit from somebody from the snows. Like you must be remembering from a past life. And it turns out to be true. He feels like a spiritual Greenlander.
I assumed that the story would end with him being disillusioned and returning to some prior incarnation, but he really did, after all those years of dreaming about Greenland, actually make a life in Greenland.
What's interesting is he doesn't stay. He loves it. He feels at home, but maybe just as in the book, he doesn't say this. It might be just part of the restless spirit that drove him there.
Yeah.
And now he's gone as far north as he can. And what else is there? In the book, he says that he feels he's got a communal responsibility. He's now the only African person who has ever had these insights or seen these customs, And so he's in a unique position to bring them back to his people. Like storytelling is a huge and prestigious part of West African life. And he has some great new stories. So he feels like he's got a cultural responsibility, a communal responsibility to his people to go home. And so, the old kind of surrogate dad guy he's staying with makes him a necklace out of a polar bear claw and tooth. And he's like, oh, wow, we do that with the leopard back home, Makes him a necklace. And he sadly boards the boat back home, thinking all the while of his Greenlander friends and, all the seal hunts that are going on without him that he's leaving behind. It's like kind of like the end of that. Do you know that movie Local Hero? Mm-hmm. Oh, just some callow American oil exec goes to Scotland and kind of falls in love with the quirky local place where he's supposed to build a refinery. I don't know. It's a 80s, but the movie ends with him back. The movie ends with him leaving, which is kind of a surprising twist. And it ends up with him back in his kind of Houston apartment, kind of looking sadly at the night sky, clearly wondering what's going on in this little more authentic village that he loved. And the book kind of ends the same way, with him heading back to Europe and Africa, but knowing that he'll always leave part of himself there. And Pomasi didn't publish a book until 1981. And by then he had actually continued to travel quite a bit, including back to Greenland, back to Africa. I think he was ended up based outside of Paris, just kind of doing the same kind of translator work. This was a well-respected and award-winning piece of anthropology when it was published. And so he was at least an amateur ethnologist, right. Invited to speak at conferences and contribute to journals. I don't know if he ever got a degree in it. I think he wound up working for an electronics company doing the same kind of good, solid office work / translation that he was doing before. And, using the proceeds to visit his two spiritual homes, Africa and Greenland.
The movement to really try and recover Inuit culture, and stymied by these decades and decades and decades of trying to eradicate Inuit culture. The Inuits now are trying to kind of, in some ways, reconstruct their culture.
And they're as lost as an outsider would be because
Well, yeah, they've been colonized and dramatically so. You know, there's a resurgence in Inuit tattooing, where, you know, young Alaskan natives are starting to kind of try and reintroduce it but you know, it's part of identity formation, right? It's not in some ways. I think it's unclear exactly what the tattoos symbolized, but they're being reappropriated. And so, because there's documentation of them, photographs, anthropological photographs, but like a lot of the tradition.
Little ancestral memory.
Yeah. And so I think like, I imagine that this book and this cultural encounter is probably a document that is used within Inuit culture as kind of a like, well, let's try and even in this kind of low moment, there might be clues to like rebuild a global knowledge.
Yeah, and from the outsider's point of view of of someone who's not even Europeanized, I guess you could say that Pomasi might be seeing it without some of the European chauvinism and biases.
Yeah, he wasn't there to bring them Christianity.
Right. In fact, he's specifically very annoyed by the Jehovah's Witnesses who are, but he's friendly. He's friendly to all.
And that concludes An African in Greenland, entry 022.JB3132, certificate number 36809 in the omnibus. Futurelings, in the unlikely event that social media still exists in your era, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram are archived at Omnibus Project. Our handles on the internet were at Ken Jennings and at John Roderick. Ken can be found throughout social media. I now am confined to my own Patreon at patreon.com/John Roderick. Not confined. I bloom there. It's where I prefer to be. You can Gmail us at the Omnibus Project at gmail.com. You can find other Futurelings wherever Futurelings are sold. And you can support this show at Patreon. And your contributions to the Omnibus Project at patreon.com help us produce the show and help the show flourish.
It's there are some great privileges that come with Patreon membership. If you haven't looked into being a supporter, go to patreon.com/Omnibus Project and check it out. Even at the lowest donation level, you get a secret free episode every month. And at the higher levels, you get perks like suggesting a show topic. Today's show, An African in Greenland, in fact, was suggested by Thomas, a listener who knew and loved the book, which I had never heard of.
Yeah, I want to read it now.
And wanted to hear it on Omnibus. It's back in African in Greenland, by the way, is back in print in the U.S. via NYRB, New York Review of Books, which New York Review Books has an amazing line of, you've probably seen them in bookstores.
At first I thought you said NRBQ, and I was like,
NRBQ
wow,
has brought
weird.
back...
Those guys are so diverse. Yeah, those are beautiful editions.
It's like, they tend toward kind of out of print, underappreciated classics, and occasionally one of their newly in print books will kind of catch on, like John Williams' book Stoner, about a young professor, I guess had kind of been forgotten. And then when the NYRB version of it came out, like Tom Hanks and all these people were extolling it. But if you want to read The Go-Between by L.P. Hartley or Henry Green's novels, the NYRB books are fantastic. Oh, Tom Nisley, my friend Tom Nisley from Jeopardy recommended me a really great spy novel.
He runs the bookstore on Greenwood Avenue.
Yeah, he runs my neighborhood bookstore, and he's a Jeopardy veteran as well. And so we get confused for each other a lot. And I'm trying to remember the name of the NYRB spy novel he recommended to me, because it was fantastic.
Well, plug his bookstore, and then people can contact him directly.
Yeah. Check out Finney Books. Ask Tom which NYRB books he likes. I was actually sitting at, I love Tove Janssen's The Summer Book. I love The Dead Avocado by Elaine Dundee. I was sitting at a like a studio commissary once with John Michael Higgins, the actor from those Christopher Guest movies. And he was saying that he was reading one of these, and it was an Eastern European one. I jotted down the title, and he was like, "Oh, this is all I read now. I just read these." And in fact, he said that who was it? It was some character actor, maybe Paul Giamatti, is always trading notes with him on which one to read next, and they just trade recommendations.
Well, why don't we start a book club? John Michael Higgins, Paul Giamatti, you and me, and all of the Omnibus listeners.
We're all going to read the same weird Finnish books. And I just, while we're mentioning Thomas's support of the show that led us to do an African in Greenland, recently we did a show about Dog and H.
Yeah.
The day that Sweden changed its traffic direction.
That's right.
And what I neglected to mention in the outro, which I was going to if it didn't come up during the show, is that was also listener suggestion.
Right.
That was our friend Jochen.
Jochen suggested it, and we did it. Jochen, a German in Scandinavia. Yeah,
that's he should write a book called A German in Scandinavia, where he has all his insights on weird sonoculture that comes from being how are the Germans different?
From the Scandinavians?
Yes.
Oh boy, let's do an episode on it.
I don't even know what I would say
How
first.
the Germans are different from the Scandinavians. They're different.
They're very different in many ways.
You're going to get a lot of letters from Swedes and Norwegians.
I just don't know what I would say out of the bat.
How they're different?
Yeah, off the blocks. What's the central, essential, spiritual difference between a German and a Swede?
Saunas.
I guess is it war and peace? Is it that simple?
Oh, war and peace. No, the Swedes came down and burned Germany for 100 years during the 30 Years' War.
But today they're all peaceful, modern Volvo drivers.
The Swedes?
Yeah.
Oh, that's what they'd have you believe.
It's a trick. They're lying in wait.
They're a tricky people. That's what it is. I should just say, the wonderful thing about Patreon.com is that the word Patreon is derived from the word patron, and really it allows you to support the show as a petit Medici. You can be your contribution of $5, a nominal amount, ends up being like a Renaissance billionaire who allows the Michelangelos of Ken and myself to paint the roof of our church.
You create a cultural patrimony.
That's right.
And a legacy. Why do all these words all have patra in them? Seems a little male.
You know how the Latins were.
Yeah. Chauvinists. I guess.
Well, yeah, the Swedes are tricky and the Latins are chauvinists. Thanks for tuning in to Omnibus, where we give one-word descriptions of all the world's cultures.
What about the Dutch?
Tall.
The Dutch are quite tall.
And taciturn. And finally, you can send actual physical media and other things. We're also maintaining a seed bank, so if you have any apple seeds you want preserved,
send us your quinoa. You
can send those to P.O. Box 55744, Shoreline, Washington 98155.
I'm just looking at a couple postcards from a listener named Alex, who apparently has recently discovered the show and is using it to
go to sleep at night.
Hope not, because he's driving across the country.
Oh dear. Good man.
He's driving across America, and he's actually done very well since he sent us photographs from both the Badlands and Independence Hall, Philadelphia.
Well, he's made it halfway, or slightly more than halfway.
I'm trying to see, which way is he going?
From the Badlands to Philadelphia, or vice versa?
This one has a map, but I can't tell which. Oh, he's headed east.
He might have just gone to a thrift store in Kansas City and found postcards from all across the country.
No, he's got a little map. He says he enjoyed the London Bridge is Down entry because it followed on Prince Philip's funeral. So it was very...
he's starting at the start then.
He made it all the way through episode 29 on his road trip. Oh, wow. Can you imagine listening to 29 of these things?
I've listened to 29 of them.
I'd be ready for NRBQ on the old stereo. He says after it took the first few episodes to get into the groove.
Oh, really? Thanks.
But he says my voice used to be stuffy. Did my voice used to be stuffy?
Yours?
I guess.
You've become much chattier.
I don't know. I think he might mean stuffy in the sense of congested, not like.
Well, we were in Atlanta. We're not used to the
not emotionally
humidity.
congested. Yeah, it must have been. But it's still the intro and the outro is still apparently my old weird stuffy voice. If you have a theory about my voice changing, please.
Oh, we're
us.
still using the intro that we recorded in Atlanta back in '07 or whenever that was.
I believe so.
Wow, that's awesome. I have no idea of the historical continuity within the show because, as you know, I've never listened to podcasts.
You haven't listened to 29 of them, like Alex. Anyway, if you have theories about my voice changing, you can email them to theomnibusproject@gmail.com.
You've been going through puberty for the first couple of years of the show.
Finally there.
Still can't grow a mustache, though.
Listeners, from our vantage point here in your distant past, we have no idea how long our civilization survived. I'm just glad I got to go through puberty. We hope and
Right
pray.
before the end.
Right. That's when you want it to happen. We hope and pray that the catastrophe we fear may never come. But if the worst comes soon, this recording, like all our recordings, may be our final word. Although I believe it is the alphabetically first omnibus.
Oh, hey, great.
Weren't we just talking about this the other day?
Yeah, we were. Is
Albanian bunkers, I think, maybe used to be first.
and now African in Greenland is?
Yeah, so this is... So if this is
But wait, it's un-African in Greenland.
Yeah, but it's African and Greenland, comma, N.
Oh, okay.
So if you are listening to the omnibus in alphabetical order, welcome.
Hey, thanks for joining the show.
However, this could be the chronologically last episode. We have no idea if the world will end between today and Thursday. So this may be our final word. But if Providence allows, we hope to be back with you soon for another entry in the omnibus.